Okay, well, let's have this. Okay, so welcome to Butcher and Barrel 4, waiting for Lyle to come in. Today we're going to be talking all things water. Oh, there he is. And I think we're going to be having some Highland Park Light today as well.
Hey, how are we doing?
Hello, good, thank you. How are you doing?
Yeah, good, thanks, buddy. Yeah, really
good. Great. Well, I said that we're going to be talking about water, and we're going to talk about water, and I should have probably said more specifically when it comes to whiskey. There's obviously probably a lot to be. You've got a lot of fire going on in the back.
Yeah, I just realised that that's kicked up. Yeah, just setting the mood, you know. Yeah.
Yeah. Could you do me a favor? Can you hit the mute button on the Zoom call for me?
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
The microphone part.
One sec.
I've got an echo. So yeah, we're not going to be talking about fire. We're going to be talking about water. But I presume that that's your fire pit. For must be chillier there in London than it is in.
Yeah, doing a bit of a photo shoot earlier, so we're cooking up some meat and things.
Love it. Nice.
Yeah, that's the remnants to keep it going.
Yeah, grand.
Yeah.
Well, let's jump in. We're going to talk a little bit about water today, and kind of like water as it goes through from, I guess, from grain to glass. And we're going to keep it nice and short and succinct. I know you've got some questions that you might send my way, but I thought we'd just start at the beginning.
Yeah,
let's
go for it.
Okay,
yeah, definitely,
so the first thing we need, obviously we're going to be using malted barley. Before we get to malted barley, we have to have barley. And for it to get to the distillery, we also need to have the barley grown. And that's typically being grown in the lowlands, but then there's a little bit that gets grown on Orkney for Highland Park as well. So rainwater, that's the first one. Who knew?
Rainwater, okay.
So rainwater to grow your drink.
Yeah.
A pretty integral part. And then another funny one as well is that with Orkney, again, like we said, you know, Orkney is so far north of there, you know, it's a string of like 70 odd islands. Most things are getting to the island by boat. Our barrels arrive by sea and our barrels leave by sea. So they go to be blended back in a ship and they arrive on a ship. So we've got water just like that ocean up there as well. And that's really where two oceans are meeting, right? Hence why the Scapa Flow is so treacherous in history. So if anybody ever actually is into wreckage diving and things like that, I know that Scapa Flow is like one of the top places in the world because there's so many sunken ships at the bottom. Anyway.
Right, like loads of U-boats and things, eh?
Exactly, yeah. There's like some awesome photos like from back in the day in an old Highland Park book that I've got. And you can really see it almost from, I mean, you remember, you know, the distillery's on the hill. If you go just up that little bit further, then you're looking right down to the Scapa Flow, right? So,
yeah, stunning up there, absolutely stunning.
So back to water. So we've now obviously got to the distillery. The water really comes in a few different places, and obviously everyone's always concerned and talks about water sources, right? You know, you think about Speyside in you know the mainland of Scotland. Yeah. It's really the side of the River Spey. Yeah, losing the name. You know, when we were camping that very first night, we drove through the Cairngorms, and then we found a place to drive. We found a place to camp that like wasn't too far away from distilleries the next day.
Yeah.
So the Cairngorms and Speyside, and I think the Cairngorms actually feed the River Spey as well for water, produces a really soft water. And you'll find that like you find it around the world, like a lot of places are obviously built alongside the water sources that are best suited for it. And so soft water is not the only water that you can use. You can use hard water. And in fact, Highland Park does use hard water. And it's really just about having the right minerals and content in there, because your mineral content is going to be part of the mashing process. It helps different enzymes to break down things. You don't want certain minerals in there because it can be bad for the stills. I believe iron's a pretty bad one and problematic because it can be reactive with the copper. But water, so you take Highland Park, right? Highland Park pulls from this hard water source, and it's called, what is it? Catty's. It's Catty Maggie, I think, is the name of this spring or this source, and there's actually a quarry there, right? It's a very hard water that comes in, but I don't believe that we have to do huge amounts of processing. We want to make sure that it's clear of like microbes, debris, that there's not like it's not cloudy or anything wrong like that. So there'll be filtration that happens, but for places that can't guarantee, you know, no microorganisms, like no microbes, all these other things in there, they really have to find another water source. Right.
Yeah.
And so we bring it in to give you an idea of how important it is. When we went to the Glenrothes sister distillery,
Mm. I was going
we
to ask
have
you about this.
so we actually have we have a number of water sources, right? It used to be, it's basically where an old mill was. So the water used to also power your mill, right, with a water wheel, another place that it was more important in the past. And then we actually pull from a number of different wells. There's like 4, but it's primarily called Ardcanny and Browkill. And those two, one of them is based on a farm. So our distillery manager, Alistair Anderson, I think is like not just on the board, but he pretty much is in control of that water. Like he's on the board of the farm to protect that water source because it's so important for us.
Right.
So he kind of gets like outsourced by us, no, sent out by us to look after the farm because the water is so
The water
important.
source is there.
Yeah.
Wow. And is that the water source that's been used since day dot, kind of?
I mean, it's always been coming down from there. Yeah, I don't know if they've gained extra like access to different sources over the time. But I mean, you see the Burn of Rothes, that teeny little stream, that little river, really. Then obviously that is not.
Yeah, coming back to your minerals thing, remember when we first turned up there, it was like it was running a whiskey river out the front because it's so full of iron, I think it is, because it's all brown as it's running down.
Oh, right. And it's funny because I think that actually might not have anything to do with the distillery, other than maybe.
Exactly, yeah, but it looks like
Yeah.
Willy Wonka, like the chocolate
Right.
river, but it's obviously like a whiskey river. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. And of course, you think about all these kinds of places. It's so there's so much rain in Scotland, and there's so much rain in Orkney. That there's no shortage of water. It's about making sure that the water is right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've got water to the distillery. There's really a number of things. There's the mashing part that I mentioned. So that's when we're adding the water into the grist, which is when it's already been kind of like ground up, and we're basically like steeping it to get all of these sugars out, so we can ferment them. But we also use it at Highland Park before then, because we do the malting, right? We have the floor maltings that we walked into. So at that point, it's dry barley, whole kernels are just going out onto the floor. So we have to spray that down, and then we have to spread it out after it's had a bit of a soak, because we're trying to get it to, trick it into germinating basically. So we have an additional water moment there. And that's all, again, it's not like Orkney has an issue for that. After that, once it's been then, once it's kind of going through that place, it needs to be kilned. Do you remember that's when they lift it to that level so that we peated at Highland Park?
Yeah. Just quickly with the...
Yeah.
I know it's going a little bit off piece, but it is kind of on piece. But why is it important that the seed gets germinated? Is it to open it up, to release the flavour, or...? So
you can absolutely make a whiskey from, just like you can make a beer from unmalted barley. But it's got like, it's not gluten, but it's got like this very like gluey character to it. You're just not going to get anywhere near the same amount of yield. Like the sugars are there if it's malted, and the sugars are like converted into maltase and ready to be extracted, you're ready to go. But if you try and extract it from unmalted barley, just as barley, it gets very gluey, you get a way lower yield, and it's just far more work. So it just doesn't happen, pretty much. It's just not worth it.
So a germinated bit of barley, that's where you get a malted whiskey.
Yeah, so it has to be, right? And malt is basically the conversion of sugars that are present in there into soluble sugars that we can extract when we've soaked it, or when we've then kilned it. So it's the grist, and we add water, then those sugars are going to come out. It's actually getting like, we'll do a whole episode about malting. We'll do a different thing on malting, but super important. Like, and it's the only way that you can make single malt. Clues in the name, hence why it's not single barley or single grain. Like, you could do that for a single grain. I don't know that people do it because it's just a mess and a pain. Yeah.
Okay. Right. So we're at the drying of the malt now.
That's right. Now at Highland Park, we're peating our whiskey, right? The peat bog, water is massively important for the bog process too. So it's another step that we have here. It's not really us. We do everything to make sure that we, restore and regenerate our peat bogs as best we can. But that's all about matter basically anaerobically decaying, because it's in water. It's basically entrenched in water underground, and that's a big part of this. So the water does play a part actually in the peating process too. Finally, we get it out. we're adding all of this water to it, into mashing it, right? So we're getting it into the wort effectively. Once we've made this, then we're fermenting, making this beer. Then it goes into the still, right? So all the water has already been added. At this moment, alcohol is developed in this water because yeast was eating the sugars that came from the barley.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to raise, or like to basically concentrate those alcohols, when we distill at Highland Park, we have steam coils inside of the stills. So we need water to go through the steam coils to heat the stills to get the liquid to come off the top. And then we use water again in those around those tubes to condense it. We need cold water, so it comes up, it's boiling, it comes up the top, and we need cool water going around to then condense it. So you can see, like, we've got the hot steam coming through the stills. It's all about reflux and making sure that not only like, we don't want to waste it. Water is an important commodity. You wouldn't think about it at Orkney. You think, come on, there's water literally everywhere all the time. Like, it's raining most of the year, and you're on a teeny island with water everywhere. But of course, it's super important to make sure that we're being mindful and that we're being, we're really utilizing it in the best possible way. At this point, it goes into the cask at strength. So it's going in at like 69 and 69.5 after it's distilled those 2 times. We do have some water loss here, but it's mostly, I don't know if you remember this, because of the humidity to the temperature in Scotland, we're actually losing more alcohol than we are water. Right. So again, that one that we tasted, that was like from 64 or whenever it was, I think it was like 1964 or 68. Yeah, over 40 odd years, that's come down to like 40.5%. Then we're going to re-add water back in because we're often not waiting that long. So then obviously the water we add back in is really important. Have you ever you've been on a wine tasting before, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And obviously you spend a lot of time talking about, like, the tannins, the acidity, the sugar content, the alcohol content. When you do a whiskey tasting, you don't really do a whole lot of talking about the acidity, about tannins. People that really, really go into it can pick it out, but you don't really. Water for me is like the difference between wine and whiskey, because a water tasting for me, I never talk about the smell. I never talk about the flavors. It's all about the physical feeling in the mouth. Okay. And so obviously whatever water you add back into your whiskey, it does make a big difference because it's going to change how it feels on the palate.
Yeah. Okay.
Right?
So like the silkiness of it, or the actual stick.
Yeah. Like when you have when you have 2 different mineral waters, some of them feel super refreshing and like they're vibrant in the mouth. Some of them feel kind of almost like cottony and like thick and chalky almost. It's that kind of thing. It's a decision you make. But at this point, we've kind of taken whiskey through production and we've got it now, let's say, into a barrel. Now it's being sent back to the mainland for Highland Park for blending. So again, it's last little trip on the water.
On the water, yeah.
And then when it gets blended, it's going to then be brought back down as well. So we've already brought it down to, like, typically for like our core things, we've already brought it down to like 46% at the distillery while we cask harmonize, and then it gets sent, right? But for some of the heavier expressions, like this guy here, when it's 52.9, I presume that we're doing that at the distillery and then sending it, stronger down. But I'd have to, every cask, I don't know how much gets lost on the journey from the island back to mainland Scotland. Something could get lost in that process too. I presume that ABV isn't going to be perfect by the time it drops down. So I'd have to check in with Gordon Motion to see what he does and if they have to add things back down at our sampling and tasting rooms as well.
Okay, nice. Oh.
Yeah. And so that kind of takes us through the whole process of where water comes in. And I think that water is one of those things, like these days I spend most of my time speaking about casks just because of how much impact that has on your final flavor. But the truth is that you're really, all of the initial process, or everything like the actual physical liquid, the final wash that's going to go in, your new make spirit that goes into the cask, all the flavor that's been developed there has either come from the yeast, the shape and size of the stills, the barley strain that you used, obviously the peat, but then the water. And again, that's where that water really does make a big impact. And there's lots of distilleries that actually have, like on Islay, the water itself has a big peat content. It's not peat, like smoked peat, but like the actual like peat. You'll get the flavor.
So do you think that comes through in the flavor in the whiskey?
Yeah, because there are. there are unpeated whiskies where you go to nose it and taste it, and it's not peat reek in the same sense as the smoke that you'll get when you're actually smoking it to dry it. But you can taste that it's there. You can taste the presence of the peat.
Is that?
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to name another whiskey on here, but there's one I find particular. I said to someone, "Oh, it's been smoked, like peat smoked," and they were like, "No, it hasn't seen any peat in its life." But maybe
Possibly
it's the water.
it could be the water in that case. And I will say that, you know, it's remarkable the diversity of flavors that you find from casks. I know that like some of our blending team and whiskey making team have pulled out samples before and shown them to my colleagues and said, like, you know, what do you think of this? I'm like, oh wow, it's quite peated, and they're like, nope, just this flavor came from the cask. So that there's also these moments where it can happen as well, that, you know, we smell and taste. There's just so many different chemical compounds. There's so many different things going on in there from so many different sources that you can find flavors everywhere. And so to not think about your water source, you know, when it is massively important in this day and age, you know, we have reverse osmosis, we can use UV lights to get rid of microbes, we can ship the thing in. But really, you know, having your own water source does mean that you do have a unique portion and identity for your single malt. So it is super, super important. And then of course, go on.
And I'm sure that if you're trying to stay with the right flavor profile for years and years, if you're keeping jumping around from water source to water source, it's going to taste different. It's going to
absolutely, absolutely. And then and it's really that sense of, you know, I don't always speak about Scotch or spirits as having a sense of terroir, but they all do. It's maybe not you know, as obvious as wine, you know, where we're really taking the raw ingredient and you're kind of drinking it directly. Obviously, distilling takes it through a bit of a different process, but, you know, aging in the casks, the water sources, depending on your whiskey, where the barley might come from, there really is often a great sense of place and heritage about it. And so having a water source that's reliable, and again, Highland Park's quite unique in the sense that it's a hard water. Most people, some of the Highland distilleries also have hard water, but pretty much everything in Speyside is a soft water source. So it is a real distinguishing factor. And then I know that you mentioned as well, you know, when we get to the water that you're going to add to your whiskey in the end, there are a few things. I chose this one because, again, it's 52.9. This is Highland Park. This is the light. And so you can see the clues in the name. Even though it's 17 years old, you can see how light it is because they're refill American casks.
Yeah.
The water.
I'm learning stuff.
Yeah. This is what we're building towards. And I'll say this now. We've talked about this briefly. We're going to build towards the two of us together doing a blind tasting of maybe 5 different whiskies. We'll know what the 5 whiskies are, but we won't know the order of them. And we're going to see if between the two of us, if we can nail it. Yeah, that's what we're working towards. So 52.9, you know, this hasn't been chill filtered or anything. The water plays more of a part or more of an impact. The reason being that, you know, it sounds obvious, but you've got to think about it this way. When you're drinking a whiskey that's 40%, like in the UK, right? 60% of that whiskey is water. 60% of that bottle is already water. It's like when you're having a gin and tonic and everyone's saying, you know, really put a lot of attention into your tonic. Well, yeah, because the majority of your drink is the tonic. Well, the majority of your Scotch is water. So it is kind of important, the water source that goes into it. And then when you do add water to it as well. So again, I said this last time, and you can kind of still see it now. Yeah, you can kind of see it. It's that's those slight walls. It's not quite as extreme as like the louche that you'll obviously get in something like an absinthe, where obviously you're really getting like that cloud come out. But the higher the alcohol, the water that you're adding is going to make even more of an impact. Just the alcohol to water ratio is going to make a big impact. And then the water you choose, like I have my own preferences when it comes to this.
So would you, you're probably going to shout it, but you wouldn't just chuck a tap water into that? You get like a bottled water. If you're going to do it properly, you get a bottled water.
I'm a realist, right? So in an ideal world, in an ideal situation, wouldn't it be nice if you always had some of the water from the source to put into your whiskey? That would be great. I do not keep a pile of, you know, Catty Maggie Spring water in my house. I don't have a pile from, you know, Odd Canyon Browkill. I don't have any Speyside water in my house. I don't have any English water in my house. I've got tap water or I've got distilled water. Distilled water I don't like it seems like it might be good because you're not adding anything. But you know, when you have distilled water, it's so thin and just benign and like so any minerals that it just feels flat in the mouth.
Yeah.
I personally am a big fan of I like Strathmore and is it what is it Kingsdown?
Kingsdale, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Kingsdown. I quite like both of those because I think I like the acidity. So I like having mineral content, but things like Volvic for me and Evian are like too creamy. They're not my favorite
Yeah.
for it.
I'm a Fiji man myself.
In a Fiji, yeah, like
I
Fiji.
have to save up for it though because it's not the cheapest of ones. So.
No, and then of course life's too short. If you like, we've talked about adding water to whiskey before, but I will still address it now. Adding water to whiskey does allow for huge amounts of transformations. I'm not saying it's how you should drink it, but bear in mind that when we're making our whiskies, our whiskey making team are diluting it down to 20% to check for imperfections, checking for things that we might not otherwise find. There's a lot of things that come into much sharper focus at different alcoholic strengths as different compounds can get out of the glass. It seems like you'd think, well, the stronger the ethanol, the more the transfer of everything's going to come out because it's more volatile. But the funny thing is that different things can become more volatile at different alcoholic strengths. It can break the surface tension, allow more to get out of the glass. It comes to enjoying whiskey, do what you want to do. But if you were like, I guess if I don't do this, but if you were really, really serious, if you've got your book and you're like writing your notes and you're always going to like, make sure that you're doing everything to a certain degree, maybe you want to bring everything down to 40% eventually so you can try everything at the same strength side by side, you probably would want to make sure that your water is the exact same water type that you're using every time, because otherwise you are adding a different element, right? If you were that, my palate's not as good, but if you were dialing it down and you were adding, Evian 1 week, Volvic another week, and then, Strathmore another week, it's going to taste different.
Yeah, it's going to be jumping around all over the place.
It's going to be jumping around. But to your point, depending on where you live, near to where I live, DC water for me kind of tastes a bit dirty, like earthy and minerally. Oh, earthy and minerally. It's like too earthy and minerally for me. In California, it tasted kind of like, in SoCal, it tasted kind of chlorinated to me, so I never used it then. So, I used to even buy it then for when I was making coffee. So, yeah, I absolutely used it for when I was dialing down my whiskey with water as well.
Right. Okay, nice.
Yeah.
Cool.
I think we did it. I think we
we
kept everything down and into a place. I didn't check the time, but I think that's the journey of whiskey and water with whiskey.
Okay, nice. No, it's good. Like one thing that springs to mind is, do you know, into making one batch of whiskey, if that's what you call it, like that's how we're going to call it, one production of how much water would actually be involved? I know that's a big question to ask.
Yeah, so a lot of that really comes down. So, you remember when we were at the distillery? It depends what you call a batch, right?
Yeah, depending on how big your mash thing is.
Yeah, exactly. So we've got the mash tun. How much can you actually physically mash in one go? Which may or may not be dictated by how large your washbacks are. So, like, you remember when we were watching it ferment in those washbacks, the big wooden, they're wooden ones that have about.
Yeah.
It's difficult to say what a batch is, and then of course you've got a still run, because that's the big thing with obviously a pot still, is that it has to be on, it's done, and it's off. It's on, it's run, and then it's off and cleaned. Whereas a continuous still is just going all the time. So there isn't really an amount. For next time that we talk, what I'll do is I'll pull how much water does it take to make a single bottle.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
But the truth and the sad reality for it is, of course, is that I'm sure it's going to be the same thing if we were talking about how much water does it make to get a steak.
It's going to be very inefficient.
There's going to be no two ways about it. There's going to be we can much with drinking scotch. First off, you have to be responsible anyway because it is also alcoholic, so you should be responsible with it. But yeah, making sure that your consumption levels are in line with whatever your environmental concerns are, because there is no way of escaping it. Same thing with meat, same thing with eating. We as consumers have our part to play. But then I know that obviously distilleries, Highland Park is an old distillery. It's basically built around it's been there since 1798. but it was basically a bothy, like a cottage at the time. You know, that it was like kind of like a like a cottage, probably without doors and windows. It was more like a hovel, right? And then it's built to what it is today. You know, we've walked around, you know, McAllen together.
Yeah.
Incredible feat of engineering. You know, it's like 95%. At 95% efficiency around the board between how things are renewed, between things like that. It's brand new. It's built around doing everything to make that the case. When you're operating a place like Hallam Park, and I know that Mary Stanton, who's the distillery manager of Hallam Park, is probably, I think it's one of her favorite things. You remember, it's like doors and stairways and alleyways, and this building now walk outside Court Road, that building. So there's constantly tweaks of finding like places that we can save more water, and that's always a big thing that they're keen to do.
I mean, like we say, it's inefficient, but I remember seeing a mash tin up there that they've been patching up with, and it's
right.
Like,
you remember that washback that they were like, it's about making sure that our washbacks aren't leaking, things like that, right?
And they've been patching it up, the same one for generations, like, and it's brilliant.
It's something. Yeah, we try and use everything we can for as much as we can, and then obviously you want to bring waste down to an absolute minimum. But yes, there's challenges along the way, and everyone's always constantly trying to do better. Well, that was water and whiskey. That's taking us from start to end. And then, of course, last thing, yes, the ice you use. Yes, if you're making ice, the water that you put into your ice will also play a part in how it will taste as well.
Right, and make big blocks of ice to just like dilute a lot slower.
To preference, it'll chill your whiskey faster and it will dilute slower.
Yeah.
If you want a pile of water in your whiskey, just throw a pile of ice in and that'll work.
Perfect. Okay, nice.
Got it.
Great. Well, if there's any other questions that people want to shoot James, send it over to him directly, I guess.
Yeah. At Whiskey Darcy, you know where to find me.
Yeah, Whiskey Darcy. And if there's anything you want to see that we haven't spoken about yet, give us a shout, and we'll see where we can go, really.
Love it. Well, good to see you as always, mate. I shall catch you in a bit.
All right,
okay.
Mate.
Thanks so much. Bye.